Hi guys and welcome back. Now in the last lesson we created our feedbacks resource, and in this lesson we're going to use a very powerful and useful feature of Rails, which is the ability to form associations between different models. So when we say different models, I'm talking about the user model and the feedbacks model. To achieve these associations, we add some code to the user and feedback models. So let's take a look at both of those models now. So just let me pop Atom open. So here we go. Let's go into our models. There we go, models. And first let's go into our user.orb model. So here we are. Now we need to add in the association for feedbacks. And how do we do that? Let's click enter and let's go has underscore many space colon feedbacks. Even without knowing Ruby, you can kind of guess what this code does. For every user, they can have many feedbacks. So you can have as many feedbacks with a user as possible. So that means that one user or one employee can get lots of feedback. And that kind of makes sense when you think about it in the real world. Let me save that. Next, let's go into our feedback model. So here we are here, feedback.orb. Let's add in this line of code. So I'll give a couple of spaces there and let's say belongs underscore to space colon user. So again, you can kind of guess what that means. Every piece of feedback has to belong to a user. Again, in the real world, when you think about it, it really does make sense. Okay, let's try and visualize what we've just done with a very simple diagram. And I've prepared this now in Excel. Let me pop this open. Let me just move that in and let me just make that a little bit bigger. There we go. Okay. In the feedbacks table, there is a user ID column. Here it is here. And this user ID column contains obviously IDs. From this, Rails is able to infer the pieces of feedback associated with each user. So for the user with ID 1, associate this piece of feedback. Pretty simple when you really think about it. A user with ID 1, match up this piece of feedback. Again, user with ID 1, match up this piece of feedback. And if we had a user with ID 2, which we do here but it's blank, and we had left them a piece of feedback, it would be user ID 2 in this column and this row here with the content. We can also inspect this information in the Rails console, and this is something we haven't looked at yet, but let's take a look now by popping into our terminal. So let me clear out the terminal here for you. Clear, there we go. So the Rails console is a tool we can use to interact with our Rails applications. We activate the console from the command line with the following command. We simply say Rails console. There we go, we're now in the console. So with the console open, we can retrieve the first user from the database with the following command. We create a variable, so first underscore user, and anybody with some programming experience will know our variable is created on the left hand side, and now we need to assign a value to this variable. So first underscore user equals user. So from the users table, let me just put a space in there. So from the users table, take the first user. Let's see what we get when we hit enter. As you can see here, we've run a very simple SQL query and we've selected the first user. So user with ID 1, name, Tony Staunton, email, job role manager, and when we created it and when it was last updated. So a nice little piece of feedback there, letting us know exactly what the first user is within the users table. Next, still within the console, let's take a look at the feedbacks attached to this first user. So again, with our first user variable, first underscore user dot feedbacks. So you can see the feedback ID here, grade 4, and the content, Tony is a good worker, with the user ID 1, so we know what user this piece of feedback is attached to. And this SQL query, first underscore user dot feedbacks, doesn't just give us the first piece of feedback, it gives us all feedback. So as you can see here, we have another one, content, Tony is a terrible worker. But this one has ID 3, and why is that? That's because we had a piece of feedback in the earlier lesson which we deleted. Okay, what else can we do with our SQL here? Let's say feedback equals, that's not an equals, there we go, equals first underscore user dot feedbacks dot first. So any guesses as to what this will be? It's the very first piece of feedback associated with the first user. What else can we do? Let's type in feedback dot user. What does that give us? It gives us users with feedback associated to them. So the outputs that we are seeing here are raw Ruby objects, and we're writing SQL commands. And don't worry, we're going to use a lot more SQL commands in later lessons. So as you can see, we've just done several things. Firstly, we retrieved the first user. Then we accessed that first user's feedbacks. After that, we returned all the feedbacks with the user ID equal to that of the first user. And finally, we returned a user corresponding to a particular piece of feedback using feedback.user. So all very good and all excellent knowledge to know and foundational knowledge to know about how to query your database. And you can experiment with the Rails console in your own time. So it's been a while since we last deployed, so let's do that now. And how do we go about doing that? Well, let's exit out of our console. There we go. Let's clear the screen up. And let's say git status because it's been a while since we checked. So as you can see, there have been a lot of changes. So what we want to do, we want to add everything. So git add -a. Okay, everything added. Now we want to say git commit -m quotation marks. So what have we just done? Well, we have completed our rapid app development. Rapid app development. Close quotation marks, hit enter. We've now committed all our changes and let's push that, git push. That's going to push all that up to GitHub for us. So let me pause this video and come back to you. Actually, no need, there we go. That was much quicker than I thought it would be. Now you might be asking yourself why I waited this long to commit and push to Git. Well, I did it for two reasons. One was to show you that you can sometimes work without a branch, although I don't actually like to do it. I like to create a branch whenever I start a new piece of code and then merge and commit that branch up. But also just to show you that for little changes, now admittedly these aren't little changes, but for some changes you can just push straight up into the master. Not really recommended and not really a best practice, but it's just to show you here that it can be done. Let's push to Heroku. Git push Heroku. Now that might take a minute, so let me pause the video and come back to you. Okay, so welcome back, and as you can see my deployment to Heroku has been successful. So let me copy out the URL, there we go. Let me copy that. So I have it copied and ready to go and look it up in my browser. But just before I do that, let's open up the browser. Let's double check. So here I am in my GitHub account, and as you can see, I'm in the Rapid App repository. And there we go. All the commits I just did 2 minutes ago are there ready for us. So completed Rapid App development. Perfect. Let's have a look at our Heroku deployment. Oh, something went wrong. What could that be? Well, let's think back. And how can we diagnose this? One way to diagnose it is have a look at the logs. So Heroku logs. Give that a minute. Let me just expand this out slightly because I can start to see something here. Error. Users does not exist. So it's telling me here that the users table does not exist. Select from users. Select users all from users table. So users do not exist. Okay, what does that mean? It means that we are missing the users table. And there's a very simple solution to this. If you think back, how did we create the user table in a previous lesson? We ran the Rails DB :migrate command, and we have not done that for Heroku, so that's what we need to do. So we say Heroku run rub Rails DB :migrate. Okay, you can see it's doing something there. Let's leave that to work away and come back in just a moment. Job done. Let's see what we get. And just before we jump off this screen, you can see here some of these things in red. Create table feedbacks, and if we go up, create table users. There we go. So maybe that has worked now. So if I just refresh this screen, fingers crossed, there we go. A functioning database powered backend website live on the internet. Not too bad for just a few short lessons. Okay guys, this brings to the end our rapid app development. So let's just have a recap of what we've done. We've had a very high level overview of Rails. We've had an introduction to MVC, which as we know is used to structure web apps. We've had a brief look at REST architecture. We've looked at data models. We've pushed a database-driven application to Heroku and live on the internet, which is what we're looking at right now, which is amazing. We now know that we can use scaffolding to create code to model data and interact with it via the web. We also know scaffolding is great as a quick start tool, but not really great for understanding or learning purposes. So I'm sure you picked up on a few lessons that I've been saying, don't worry about it, we're going to get into that later. And scaffolding is not a great learning tool. It's a rapid app development tool, but in the next lessons we are really going to get into the nuts and bolts of Ruby. We've also looked at how REST architecture provides us with a standard set of URLs and controller actions for interacting with data models. That was the create, the index, the destroy, the show, the edit. We had a look at that. We know and we've seen how Rails can support validations. So we know that we can add in validations such as don't allow a user to create a content if it's less than 10 characters and so on. And we've also seen how Rails has built-in functions to define associations between data models. And finally, we took a look at the Rails console. So a lot covered in these few lessons and a lot more to do, but I think you'll agree that you have come a very long way. In the previous lessons, you've installed Rails, you've got it up and running, you've set up a sample app, a sample Hello World app, you've set up a very simple database-driven back-end application and pushed it to Heroku. So a lot done and lots more to do. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next lesson.